Testing, testing. How do you feel when I say those words? Do you get that little knot in the pit of your stomach? Maybe a little tingle in your spine? Maybe there's a little happy light bulb going off over your head. Well, that's our first question. Let's take a test. And raise your hand to designate your answers. Let's see if this will move. There we go. What do you think? Are standardized tests A, fun to take? Anyone? B, an important tool for evaluating knowledge? A couple of people. C, a necessary evil? Now we got some hands. What about D, a distraction from real learning? Almost everyone. Well, I'll tell you a little secret. I actually love taking multiple choice standardized tests. I like psyching out the test maker and figuring out what they think is the right answer, and I love having a right answer, which happens to me very rarely in the rest of my life. So this is a very finely developed art for many of us. But in fact, this skill that we spend so much time on is practically useless. Dozens of studies have shown that the kinds of standardized tests we use predict almost nothing about your success later in life. And if you think about it, when have you ever gone to the office and gotten a piece of paper with a set of questions and predetermined answers that you could check off, turn in, and go home because your work is done? Has not happened to me. Or what about a young engineering grad who goes down the street for their first tech job, gets their first engineering problem and says, "What are my 5 choices?" That would be the first and last day on the job for that young person. And in fact, if you did go down the street to Google, you would in fact not be given a test or asked for your test scores. They used to take that information and transcripts and use that to figure out who to hire, but they discovered when they studied it that there was no correlation between those scores and how people performed on the job. And so today, if you want to apply for a job there, they would be trying to find out about your learning ability, your ability to get new information, figure out how to apply it to a complex problem, work with other people and other ideas to frame a puzzle or a solution, test it, learn from that, and develop a product or a solution. And in fact, that set of skills are in greater demand in the economy as a whole. We've seen a sharp increase in the demand for higher order thinking skills and complex communication and problem solving, and a sharp decrease in the demand for skills that are routine, like the sort that people needed on the assembly line and in the factory, because those jobs are being outsourced and digitized. And this problem is getting even more pronounced as knowledge is growing at a very rapid pace. Now, as a Stanford professor, I don't usually like to quote people from Cal Berkeley. I'm sure there's somebody from Cal in the house. Yeah, always is. But there are these 2 professors at Cal who have been doing fascinating research. They've been studying the growth of knowledge in the world. And they found that between 1999 and 2003, there was more new knowledge created in the world than in the entire history of the world preceding. Think about that. And think about what that means for education. It means we can't take all the facts we want kids to know and divide them up into the 12 years of schooling and get them to memorize those facts and spit them back. It means our young people are going into a world where they will use knowledge that hasn't been discovered yet and technologies that have not been invented yet to solve complex problems that we have not managed to solve. Global climate change, the availability of water and food to feed the earth, deep conflicts that need to be resolved, without which we may have no planet in a couple of decades. They need a lot more than the ability to pick one answer out of 5. But the tests we use are developing a different kind of thinking. And here's an example from the California Standards test of a couple years ago. I'll give you the same 10 seconds that the kids have when they confront this question. In this particular one, John's solution to an equation is shown below. And the question is, which property of real numbers did John use for step 2? Take a quick look. How many of you think it was A? How many think it was B? How many think it was C? How many of you think it was D? Well, a few of you knew and remembered that, in fact, it's B, the zero product property of multiplication. But I noticed that many of the rest of you have nonetheless had successful and satisfying lives. How is that? Beyond the question of why should we be drilling students on this kind of a problem instead of teaching them to apply their knowledge to real problems, we should also ask the question of what kind of instruction is reinforced when you're trying to train kids to take this kind of test. So what is the teacher doing if she's preparing for this? Rote learning and memorization, right? While the demands of the society are so much different. Well, in addition to this, standardized testing has increased dramatically over the last dozen years. It's up 300% since 2002 in federally mandated testing, and more than that with state and local tests. In that year, the federal government passed something called the No Child Left Behind Act. Some people call it No Child's Behind Left, because of the amount of grief it has caused. It is a law that requires students to take tests every year in order to rank and judge their schools. And schools must increase their scores by a certain amount each year or face sanctions. If they don't meet those targets, they can ultimately be closed or their staff fired. In some states, students are held back in grade or denied diplomas because of the tests. Recently, the federal government added incentives for states to tie the test scores to teacher evaluation, which has ballooned the amount of testing still further. This year in Broward County, they announced an additional 800 new tests they would be adding in order to meet the teacher evaluation mandate. Well, this, of course, affects teaching. And as one teacher put it from Texas, she said, "I've seen students who can pass the test, but cannot apply the skills to anything if it's not in the test format. As for higher quality teaching, I'm not sure I would call it that." And in fact, 85% of teachers have said that standardized testing is undermining good teaching. Last year, 45% said that it has made them consider leaving the profession, and in fact, some have left. Testing, as it's growing and expanding in the curriculum and the test prep component of it, is also pushing out research and writing, science and social studies, art, music, physical education, and world language studies, despite the fact that we know that cognitive science has shown that studying those subjects actually expands our cognitive capacity and our basic intelligence, which raises achievement and accomplishment in a variety of domains. Perhaps worst of all, students feel less joy and more fear. I remember when my own daughter came home from kindergarten, terrified that a test she was about to take would sort the class into the stupid class and the smart class for the following year. We get reports every spring about students crying and throwing up on their test booklets because of the stress and the stakes that are attached to the tests. For the first time this year, students and parents around the country began opting out of the test. Several 100,000 parents refused to allow their students to take standardized tests this spring. And some have voted with their feet, taking their children out of public school into private schools where the demand for this amount of testing with these kinds of stakes is not present, and where students can participate in active, engaged learning, project work, and other things that will support them later in life. Now, you would think with all of this, we would be the master test takers of the universe. We would have the highest scores, and they would be increasing. But in fact, on the international assessments, our scores have gone down slightly over the last dozen years in math, reading, and science. And in fact, we have been falling further behind other countries, now ranking between 21st and 32nd on those international assessments, which actually evaluate higher order thinking skills and students' abilities to apply their knowledge to new problems. We were the undisputed leader in education in the 1970s, but since then, as you can see, many countries have forged ahead, including little tiny Singapore, which had almost no education system at all in 1965 when it became independent. So what's going on in these other countries? Well, for one thing, they test very differently. We test our students more than any other country in the world and are more likely to do so with multiple choice tests. In Singapore, most of the assessments, first of all, there are fewer. There's one in elementary school and a set in high school where students do open-ended essay responses and problem solutions and oral responses, and increasingly project-based assessments, like this one, where students actually design a scientific experiment, conduct the experiment, collect the data, write up their results in something that looks like a small science journal article, while our kids are sitting at a desk bubbling in. They are becoming the scientists and technologists of the future. There are some schools that are pushing back, that have in fact said we can assess in a different way that will actually help kids learn deeply and apply their knowledge. Suburban and urban schools across the country and many communities, as well as some private schools, have created what they call a graduation portfolio system. Students complete to a set of standards projects in science, social science research, literary analyses, math modeling, arts demonstrations, world language proficiency. They do this work to a standard and revise it until it meets the standard. They present it like a dissertation to a set of judges, sometimes from outside the school, like business people and college professors, as well as teachers and students and parents from inside the school. They're engaged and excited about their work, about solving the problems that they've taken on. They come before school and after school to really get it to the level of depth and quality that they want to demonstrate. And interestingly, kids from these schools, even from high poverty communities, actually go to college at higher rates and graduate from college at rates nearly twice as high as the average American student. If you ask them why they succeed in college, they'll say it's because of this work. Not only did they learn to investigate and write clearly and speak proficiently and defend their ideas, but they also learned to plan a complex project and follow it through. They learned to be resilient in the face of obstacles. They learned to take and use feedback. They learned to be resourceful in the way that you need to be to succeed in life. We are in this country at a turning point. Will we choose A, reinforcing the factory model schools of the past, or will we choose B, developing schools where students are able to apply their knowledge to critical thinking and problem-solving situations? Fortunately, California is moving in a different and new direction. Having rejected the federal incentives, California eliminated its old California standards tests that you saw a minute ago, adopted new standards based on higher order thinking skills, and a new set of assessments, fewer but deeper, that will be used to assess and improve schools rather than to test and punish. And students might see a research task like this one on their new assessments. As chief of staff for a congressperson who has to decide about bringing a nuclear power plant into the state, they might need to research both sides of that issue, evaluate the credibility of the sources, and write a memo based on the evidence, making a recommendation about how to move forward. A very different way to think and learn, as well as to demonstrate knowledge. So is MIT moving in a different direction. They've announced that they will be encouraging students to submit portfolios as part of their admissions, as have 800 other colleges and universities. Congress is debating this issue right now. There is a Senate bill that's been voted out of committee. It will come to the floor in the summertime that would leave No Child Left Behind and open up a new approach to evaluating education. But even in this bill, only 5 states might get permission to innovate in terms of their assessments. Which of us will be lucky enough to have our children and grandchildren in those states? And what about the other 45 states that would like to catch up with countries around the world and come into the 21st century? Why should they be held back? Well, our future does hang in the balance. If we want education to prepare our young people to solve the challenges we face and build a better planet, then we will need to free our nation and our schools to become the creative problem solvers and the innovative leaders that we have always before been and must once again become. The question is this: are we ready to reclaim our future? There are no predetermined answers. ultimately, we must all decide. Thank you.